Welcome to the Pan Am Podcast, brought to you by the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York. This podcast and our museum are dedicated to celebrating the legacy of the world's most iconic airline, Pan American World Airways. My name is Tom Betty, and I'm the host of this program. Thank you for joining us. This program is sponsored by the generous support of Mr. Adam Aron, the CEO of AMC Entertainment Holdings Incorporated. The Pan Am Museum Foundation is a non-profit organization. Please visit our website for more information at thepanammuseum.org. Again, our website is thepanammuseum.org. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. If you are using Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving a review. It will help others discover this program. If you're not familiar with Pan Am, welcome. We are honored to have you here, and for you to learn about what we're all about. If you already know of Pan Am, worked for or flown on the airline, or just love our history, it's good to be with you again. So with that, let's get this episode in the air, so to speak. Welcome aboard your Pan American Jet Clipper. In this episode, we celebrate Black History Month and are joined by author Bruce Wolk to explore the inspiring life of sports legend Junius Kellogg and his incredible connection to Pan American World Airways. And I must say that this is definitely in the top 10 of my favorite Pan Am stories, and until now, this story is not widely known. Junius Kellogg was born on March 16, 1927, in Haverstraw, New York, to Lucy Lee Williams and Theodore Kellogg. At a very young age, the family moved to Portsmouth, Virginia. Young Junius always excelled in the classroom as an outstanding student, but also was an exceptional athlete in every sport he attempted. While in high school, Junius made the Virginia State High School All-Star team, as well as earning high marks in academics. After graduating in 1946, he was awarded a scholarship to West Virginia State. However, he was drafted into the United States Army after only one semester. While in the military in 1948, Junius was named First Army All-Around Athlete. The next year, he was offered a basketball scholarship to Manhattan College as the school's first African-American scholarship recipient. When eligible to play in the 1950-51 season, the 6'10" Kellogg made an immediate impact on the team. But in January 1951, after reporting that someone was attempting to bribe him, Junius helped authorities uncover the biggest betting scandal in collegiate basketball history, and was subsequently hailed a national hero for his honesty and courage. But despite this, a career in the NBA eluded him, mainly because being the whistleblower embarrassed some of the league's executives and star players that were likely involved in past betting schemes. After graduation in June 1953, he was invited to join the Harlem Globetrotters, even though he still dreamed of becoming a professional basketball player in the NBA. That dream was shattered, and his life forever changed on April 2, 1954, when a horrific car accident left him paralyzed from the shoulders down. While recovering in the Bronx Veterans Hospital, Junius was approached to be head coach of the Pan Am Jets, a wheelchair basketball team sponsored by Pan American World Airways. In addition, Pan Am offered him a job in the accounting department. He became the first African-American coach in the history of wheelchair basketball, and with the Pan Am Jets, brought the sport to people throughout the world. Junius coached the United States wheelchair basketball team to a gold medal at the Tokyo 1964 Paralympic Games. Let's take a listen to a 2-minute clip from the United States Olympic Paralympic Museum in Colorado Springs. There is a link in the episode description to watch this video.
Integrity was never optional for Junius Kellogg. From the moment the 6'10 center arrived to Manhattan College in 1950, the school's first African American player made his presence known on the hardwood. But his presence stood out the most off the court, when before a game versus DePaul in 1951, he was approached in his dorm room with a $1,000 proposition.
You can think about you can make some money if you participated, and you don't have to lose. You just save a few points, cut the margin down, and hey, everybody makes out. So I'd never heard of anything like this before.
Kellogg rejected the offer, alerting his coach Ken Norton and the district attorney of that fateful meeting.
To do what he did takes a tremendous amount of courage, considering the climate of the social awareness, racial tension. You know the young man had to be afraid.
Soon after, police uncovered widespread point shaving and gambling in the college basketball landscape. Over 32 players across the nation admitted to taking bribes to fix over 80 games.
I can say that as far as that goes, any athlete in the country, in any college, would have done the same thing if he was for clean sports and clean living. Thank you.
I like to put it in context of being a Jasper. What does it mean to be a Jasper? To be admirable, and that tells you the type of person he was, the type of man he wanted to be, to stand up to all those injustices and just be the man that his family probably he brought him up to be. Takes a lot to stand up and do that in the face of all that adversity.
I think the story here is about integrity, character, honesty, and courage. That was what it's all about. He's my role model. He's also my hero.
Junius Kellogg refused to stain his integrity in an era of perverse gambling and racial tensions, because to him, integrity was never optional.
Inspired by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, he left coaching and devoted his professional life to community activism through the New York City Development Agency and the Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association. Junius Kellogg has been inducted into the National Wheelchair Basketball Association's Hall of Fame, as well as the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame. He died at age 71 on September 16, 1998. Now on to our interview. Bruce H. Wolk was originally trained as a research biologist, but while pursuing his studies, he could not turn his back on his love of creative writing and English literature. As he made the transition to being a full-time writer, the years spent in biological research proved a valuable asset in hunting down details and interviewing hundreds of people. He has a particular fondness for American stories of hidden historical figures. Bruce has authored numerous nonfiction articles on topics as diverse as dogs, sports ethics, gardening, and negotiation skills. He is the author of 6 books and is currently writing the book Junie and Me, about the 48-year friendship between Junius Kellogg and his best friend, Bob Otten. Bruce holds 2 degrees in the sciences and an MBA in management. He was also certified as a New York City paramedic. He now lives in Denver, Colorado. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and I'm glad to be here.
So, Junius Kellogg, tell us a little bit why you picked this particular gentleman to study.
It was kind of an accident. As a matter of fact, I was certain that there had been a book written about his life because he was such a key figure, especially in sports, in the early 1950s. And as I began to search for books, I lo and behold, there was nothing really written about his life. It's a very important story for anybody who's interested in basketball, sports, etc. I am a writer primarily interested in the topic of what I call uncovering hidden American stories.
Interesting.
I love especially marginalized people, people who are lost to history and to time. And I just like to reach back and find folks. And so given that, I started on the topic of Junius Kellogg, and I reached out to a place called Manhattan College, which is where Junius Kellogg went to school. Prior to the time he went to Manhattan College, he was born in 1927. He had a very hard life. The family was very poor. He was the oldest of 11 children. He grew up in Portsmouth, Virginia. Everything about Junius's life, as you can imagine, was defined by racism. And so as he was growing up, the rampant racism of the day affected everything in terms of he and his family. He was a very good student, especially given that he was forced into a segregated school. He was a very good basketball player, especially since their grand facilities at this so-called separate and equal educational system was a packed dirt court out in back of the school and a couple of beat up old backboards. Nevertheless, Junius Kellogg was, in a sense, a freak of nature. He was in team pictures of him going back to his high school football team and his high school swimming team, whatever he was doing. He always towered over everybody else. It's very easy to pick Junius out in a team picture.
How tall was he?
That's kind of debatable. I believe it was 6'10" when he was fully grown. Some of the texts said 6'8". However, and his very good friend Bob Otten, who I will talk about in a minute, Bob and Junius remained friends for 48 years, which, given the era, the time, was quite unusual for a white basketball player and a black basketball player to form a friendship back in 1951, and it lasted all the way until 1998. But the interesting thing about, in terms of the context of what you just asked, Bob was 6 feet 6 inches approximately. And the first time he saw Junius Kellogg, and Junius Kellogg came through the dorm room door, he said, "I was looking up to Junius Kellogg like I was back in Cub Scouts." I mean, the man was huge. He barely made it through the doorway. And so I think the 6'10" figure is much more telling, much more typical. Junius, as I mentioned, went through quite an ordeal before he ever got to Manhattan College. He didn't have any plans after high school. I mean, who was going to give him a chance coming from Portsmouth, Virginia, in a segregated school? It was West Virginia State University, and that's a historically Black college or university. And he lasted one semester before he was drafted by the Army. And so he packed his bags, went off to the Army, and he was drafted and went into the Army for about 3 years. And he became a platoon sergeant. But during that time, he kept working on his basketball skills. By the time he was released from the Army in 1948, he was voted the first Army all-around athlete. That's how good he was. And he was not only great in basketball, he was great in football, he was great in running, he did some boxing, he liked to play ping pong. He was sort of like the Jim Thorpe of his era in a way. He kept excelling at every sport, but it was basketball he liked the best. He finished with basketball in the Army, and he had something like 90 offers from various universities. They all wanted Junius. But let's remember that Junius, and this goes back to my observation about the era, racism was rampant. We don't think of it quite as he might back in the day, but he wanted to go to a school that was in a larger city, and he wanted to go to a school that had a large African-American community. And then parenthetically, his coach in the Army happened to be the brother-in-law of Ken Norton, who was the head coach of Manhattan College. So he referred Junius, and Junius liked it very much. Junius came from a deeply religious family with very close bonds. And as a result, in this family, they wanted him to go to a religious-oriented school if he wanted to do so. And that's exactly what he did. He started at Manhattan College in 1941, and then he was ineligible for the first year because of the West Virginia State University. Then he began to play in 1950, had an immediate impact. And let's just give a little background, because this is going to come into play as we talk about the Pan Am Jets. In the early 1950s, polio, which is again rearing its ugly head, polio was kind of the COVID of its day, except it was in many ways much more serious. So that will have an influence here. He was a World War II veteran. However, in his time in the Army, even though Truman supposedly integrated the Army, he was subject to racism there. So he started at Manhattan College, had an immediate impact. Now we come to a date in history, January the 16th, 1951, or actually a few days before that. Junius was a very honest and upright, noble person, and a teammate from the year before came into his dorm room, and he was shocked by seeing this teammate walk through the front door, because this teammate was an out-and-out racist, rode Junius constantly with other teammates, making fun of him, etc. And he couldn't understand why this man would come to see him. But he let the guy talk. The man's name, whose name was Henry Poppy, said, "Hey, Junius, how would you like to make $1,000? And all you have to do is miss some baskets, throw the ball out of bounds." Now, at that time, and this is why this is so significant in terms of Junius Kellogg's life, at that time, a lot of people, being coaches, universities, even the newborn NCAA and other basketball institutions, the NBA, they all knew that what they call point shaving was going on. There was a published spread in the newspapers. And so let's say a school was supposed to win by 10 points, and instead somebody fixed it. So maybe the school won by 14 points or 6 points, whatever the gamblers and mobsters wanted them to do. Junius turned around the next day. He couldn't sleep. First of all, Manhattan College is a very good school. He said, "I'm a poor Black man from Portsmouth, Virginia. This is the chance of a lifetime." Secondly, Junius came from this family I referred to that was deeply religious and had a great sense of moral value. He said, "I can't do this. And no matter what the outcome is, I'm going to report this." He reported it to his coach. And lo and behold, Tom, this set into effect a whole set of dominoes falling on each other. The coach called the chief of detectives, who was his friend. Chief of detectives called the chief of police. They called the DA's office. The DA went back to the university. The next day, Junius did very well in a basketball game, but the next day, the coach essentially told him, "Hey, why don't you meet me in my office tonight for an important meeting?" So they met for a meeting, and lo and behold, it wasn't just Junius's coach. It was an entire cast of characters. Wow. They had Junius wear a wire. Wow. They basically, and this was Dick Tracy stuff back in the day.
And for our listeners, what is the year?
This is 1951, early in 1951, January 1951. Well, he blew the whistle. Now, during this one particular game, Junius was awful. He really was. He missed passes. He tripped over his own feet. He was so bad that the coach had to sit him down a few times, and a backup center helped them win the game. The point is, in Junius's mind, listen, everybody's going to be out to get me. There were mobsters in Madison Square Garden who were taking bets. He said, if I blow this opportunity, who knows? I could wind up in a bad position here. Nevertheless, against everybody's expectations, Manhattan College won the game, and Junius admitted he had very little to do with the victory that night. But what was significant is that he stood up to the mob when everybody else was afraid to do so. Now, the name Junius Kellogg reverberated across the entire world of sports. Junius is, in a sense, or became defined by his willingness to stand up to all of these people. And it's very interesting. When all was said and done, something like in excess of 85 basketball games were fixed. 35 players and mobsters were indicted. Some went to jail. Not surprising,
wow.
the ones who went to jail were the African American players, when they did nothing more or less than what anybody else did. But this was the mentality of the era. And so Junius Kellogg became defined by this moment. I should back up and say that his friend Bob Otten was the one who told me about the fact that Junius was drafted again just months after he uncovered this scandal. And why would he? His friend Bob Otten felt that it was revenge in a way. There were politicians on the take. There were mobsters giving them money. A lot of gamblers. That's Bob's theory. It's never been proven. The other thing is that although many universities were implicated in this, there were many that weren't. There are records of, let's say, some detectives intentionally knocking recordings off the table, breaking them, so the other colleges wouldn't be included. There was also pressure at the end, and this is very significant. The NBA wanted no part of this scandal because the NBA had professional basketball players in it who had played at the collegiate level. And there's every possibility that they were trying to influence games as well. But Junius Kellogg blew up this entire thing. Junius Kellogg graduated. There was a very touching conversation between he and Bob Otten. Junius came on campus after he graduated, and he said, "Bob, I don't know what to do with myself. I cannot get into the NBA because of my color." The NBA had, at that time, had a few Black players, but not that many. And it also is theorized that one of the reasons that Junius could not get into the NBA wasn't so much his color, but the fact that this guy was an honest guy. And there were influences that said, maybe we shouldn't have such an honest guy here because he's likely to blow the whistle on other dishonesty. Nevertheless, he could not get any teams to take an interest in him. What occurred was that the Harlem Globetrotters had an interest in Junius. And he really didn't want to go to the Harlem Globetrotters because he said, they're going to make me into a clown. It's a clown show. But Junius and Bob had this discussion, and Bob said to Junius, you know what? Get your strength up, get better, get more fit, get your skills down better, the NBA cannot exclude Black players forever. They will notice you and you will have a shot. And Junius said, it's not a bad idea. Let me think about it. And that's exactly what happened. There were something like 57 players who tried out for the Harlem Globetrotters in his class, if you will. He made the team. Now, this is where this story starts to weave in to Pan Am. It's an interesting association.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an important date, April the 2nd, 1954. Junius Kellogg and a teammate were driving down to Arkansas to participate in a pickup game. The players, they needed to raise money until the regular Harlem Globetrotters season started. Money for sports was not exactly what we have in this day and age. The guy's name was Boyd Bowie. He was known as the one-arm wonder. He was the driver, and Junius's 6'10" frame was trying to cram into the passenger seat of this beat-up old Chrysler. Who knows what year it was? It could have been a 49 or 48, but if you've ever seen an old Chrysler, they look more like tanks. And there were 3 people in the back, and they were anxious. They were driving from Chicago down to Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And this guy, Boyd Bowie, who only had one arm, mind you, went to pass another vehicle at a high rate of speed. He lost control. The car started to flip. It flipped 5 times.
Oh, my.
Of the people in the car, the 3 guys in the back, Boyd Bowie in the driver's seat, and Junius Kellogg. Junius Kellogg was the one who was very badly injured.
Oh, no.
Junius Kellogg he went into a coma. And the people on the scene said, is he alive yet? Does he even have a chance? And they didn't know. The ambulance people, I can't even call them paramedics in that day, or EMTs. They were just drivers. The key thing here is that they treated Junius as though he was a living person and not someone who had passed away.
Mm-hmm.
They put Junius on the door of the car. That's how badly mangled it was. Carried him to the ambulance, tied his legs to the ambulance because ambulances weren't built to carry 6'10" athletes, and took him to the Davis Hospital in Arkansas, where he hovered between life and death. And then they transferred him to the VA hospital in Little Rock, Arkansas. And it was 1954 technology where they put his head in a halo. He was completely immobilized. His mother, who was the rock of his life, she scraped together the airfare. I don't know what airline, and probably not Pan Am, but she scraped together the money to make it to the hospital. And they basically told her, Mrs. Kellogg, prepare for the worst. But she was determined that he was going to live. And so she sat by his side. This is the kind of family this was, or most any family, but she sat by his side 14 to 16 hours a day. She wasn't naive.
Wow.
But she said, she said that this is my mission. My mission is to see you to be at least able to sit up in a wheelchair. And no one believed that could happen.
So he's in a coma right now in the hospital.
Right now he's in a coma.
And do they know that he wouldn't be able to walk again?
No. As a matter of fact, and this is something that a theme that's quite interesting. Junius became sort of a publicity tool. I hate to say it. I mean, it happens now, but it happened a lot then. Junius Kellogg was a 1951 hero. He was a 1950s hero. He was a veteran. He stood up for morality and all of that stuff. And so the reports that initially came out of the hospital, and frankly, the Little Rock Hospital, even though President Truman had said, well, we're going to integrate the troops, etc., the hospital itself was segregated. It was
in the
Little
deep
Rock,
South,
Arkansas, and the year was
in the 50s.
in the deep South. It was 1954. I mean, and even though it's the whole thing between what is it, de jure and de facto segregation, even though it wasn't officially supposed to be, it was. And so Junius is hovering here between life and death. And his mother's belief helped save him. And we talk about some of the nightmares he had as he was, and one nightmare he was screaming. And so the first miracle that happened was the doctor came in, he said, Junius, if you can scream, I can take the trach tube out. And that's what he did. Junius was afraid that he would choke to death, but that didn't happen. And then the second thing that happened was, you remember names when you do a book like this, you sometimes can't know why. But a hospital attendant named Inez Forbush, who just passed away at 103 or 104, looked down at his hand. She said, Junius, you're moving your thumb. And the doctor said, impossible. You can't be moving your thumb. He's paralyzed. And this talks to your question. And so she worked with Junius. And lo and behold, he first moved his thumb, and then his fingers, and then his hands, and then his arms a little bit. And a little bit later on, he had some tightening in his shoulder. Now, he shouldn't have felt anything, but they were working with him in rehab. And he said, I don't care how much this hurts me, work my shoulder. And he got feelings back in his shoulder. So to answer your question, no, he never walked, but he did regain much more than they thought. He had a ruptured spinal cord. It wasn't severed. Now, who knows, in 2022, maybe they could have gotten more function, but this was a long time ago.
And how old was he in 1954?
27, 28 years old. He was still a fairly young man. But when he joined Manhattan College coming out of the Army, he had already gone through 3 years. He was already 24, 25 years of age. He wasn't by sports standards, he wasn't exactly young. Well, what happened was he was staying down in the Arkansas VA, the Little Rock VA. And the press was reporting, oh, Junius is happy and he's making progress. They were taking pictures of Junius standing at the parallel bars. And they said, Junius can't walk very well. He can't walk far, but he can take a couple of steps. That was pretty much a patent lie. And Junius, one day, about a year later, this would have been around 1955, around March of 1955. He called up Ken Norton at Manhattan College and he said, please get me out of here. Use your connections. I helped basketball. I helped Manhattan College redeem its name. I helped the NCAA. I helped the future NBA. Please get me out of here and transfer me up to the Bronx VA, at least, so I can get back to Harlem and I can get back to my friends. And within a very short time, they transferred him up there. Now, here is where, slowly, Junius Kellogg begins to meet Pan Am.
And this is a great spot to take a quick break with a commercial from 1957.
Pan American, world's most experienced airline. Hawaii's golden beaches and beautiful music are as close as tomorrow Tomorrow, you can be in Waikiki, less than a day away by Pan American. Fly first class or tourist on Pan Am's Radar-equipped Super 7 Clippers, or first class overnight on Pan Am's luxurious double-deck Super Strata Clippers with berths and bed-length sleeperette reclining seats. Hawaii is a perfect spot for your next 2-week vacation, and so easy to get to when you go Pan American, the world's most experienced airline.
Welcome back to our interview with author Bruce Wolk on the incredible story of basketball legend Junius Kellogg.
There was a gentleman who's now lost to history named Bernie Hangber, Hangber, who was an administrator at the Veterans Administration Hospital. And despite everything that the papers said, Junius was normally a very happy, good-natured person, was in depression. Who wouldn't be? This was a world-class athlete. Not only we haven't even gotten into the fact, Tom, that he was a scholar as well. He loved sciences, he loved English literature, but in terms of sports, Junius had every intention of trying to continue on with sports, at least for a little while.
I was going to ask you what he was studying in college.
Primarily physical education, because that's what they said he should be studying. What Junius really loved were a lot of these other courses. However, it was very funny because Bob Otten, who was his roommate, Bob Otten, who was raised as a Catholic in a German household, was struggling with German and with Catholic Church history, whereas Junius was breezing through all of this stuff. And so Junius said, "Don't worry, Bob, keep plugging away. You'll get there." And that's exactly what he did. So Junius there is in this situation of depression. The brothers from Manhattan College visited him and tried to help him out of his depression. But this guy, Bernie Hangberg, said, I know somebody. His name is Saul Welger, Welger, but it was pronounced Welger with the J sound. He was, at that time, working for Pan Am World Airways. Now, here is another influence from the 1950s, again, coming into play that I mentioned at the very beginning. Saul had polio. Saul was a tremendous athlete. He had tremendous upper body strength. And so he took to wheelchair sports, especially basketball. And Junius, of course, was the former Division I athlete, the former Harlem Globetrotter. Bernie said, "Saul, why don't you go to the Bronx VA and just get to know Junius and become his friend, because Junius loves athletics so much." And that's what they did. Now, let's talk about Pan Am a little bit. And this is perhaps the most exciting hidden part of this story, at least for me and Pan Am is concerned. Again, there are people kind of lost time, but it's very interesting. There is, and she's still very much alive, and a wonderful lady named Patsy McGuire. She was the daughter of John McGuire, who was the assistant controller of Pan Am Airways. And she contracted polio, as did so many children of that era. Now, the controller is a larger-than-life character by the name of John S. Woodbridge. John S. Woodbridge could be the subject of a Hemingway novel, because John Woodbridge was also an ambulance driver in World War I, and he saw many serious battlefield injuries. And what he did was he became interested in Patsy McGuire and her paralysis at the time. She fully recovered pretty much, but he wondered, all of these veterans from World War II, And all of these poor souls who had polio, what can I do that will bring the airline into this situation? He went to upper management, and this is how the Pan Am jets were started. And so around 1954, when Junius was injured, maybe a little bit before, the Pan Am jets emerged as a team. They wore the Pan Am logo on their uniforms, and on the backs of their wheelchairs was also the Pan Am logo.
That's incredible. I would like to think that I have some knowledge of Pan American World Airways. And when we first started chatting, this was brand new to me.
It's an amazing story. Now, if we take every other accomplishment that Pan Am has done or did in its history, I can make a very good argument that Pan Am Airways is responsible for the rise and the popularity of adaptive sports in the world.
That's fascinating.
Not just the United States, in the world, because I'll give you a few examples. We have the time. So between John Woodbridge and John McGuire, they fielded the Pan Am Jets team, and they were very good. Even more, not more amazing, they took these guys that were, let's face it, and if you were in a wheelchair back then, it's not so easy now, but if you were in a wheelchair back then, you were the object of pity.
Mm-hmm. And then added to that, he's African American in the 1950s.
I also want to say that more racism kind of crept into the situation as well, even on the team. But he gave McGuire and Woodbridge, hired these folks to be accountants, computers, or very early computer support, reservations, and bookkeeping. And so they not only had dignity of jobs, they were an athletic team, and they were a very interesting athletic team. This would lead to many other things. Now, the coach of the Pan Am Jets, the original coach, decided to leave for reasons, who knows, but he decided to leave. The team was without a coach. And this gentleman, Saul Welger, went to John McGuire and John Woodbridge, and he says, I think I have a solution for you if the man is interested. He was talking about Junius Kellogg. Took him quite a while to convince Junius to consider becoming, even playing wheelchair basketball, let alone to become a coach. Because optimism is a powerful thing. And Junius said, well, if I got feeling back in my shoulders and hands, maybe I can get it in my entire body and I can run up and down the court again. That never happened. And so finally, Saul went to Junius and said, Junius, it couldn't hurt, could it, if you just watched a practice? Just come out and watch a practice with me. And Junius did, and immediately fell in love with the game because he saw wheelchair basketball as having the same dynamics as regular basketball. That's exactly what occurred. He fell in love with the game, and he agreed, at least in part. So the critical date here is November 1956. He's on the ward of the Bronx VA, and the telephone rings. And they said, Junius, you have a phone call. And of course, the guys, being who they were all in wheelchairs. They were all paralyzed to some degree. They were kidding him. Oh, you must have a date or something like this. I can just imagine the banter going back and forth. But that's exactly what occurred. It was John Woodbridge. He said, Junius, I'd like to offer you the job to be the head coach of the Pan Am Jets. And he didn't know what to say. He said, thank you. He was floored. After 2 years or more, going through what he did, going through his near death, to have the chance to coach a basketball team and to be on the floor with the team and to represent worldwide, not only as a coach, but as you mentioned, as an African-American coach, as a disabled African-American coach.
This is such a great story.
And by the way, I probably will repeat myself and repeat it again. Junius became the first Black coach in the history of adaptive sports. I'm talking across the board. Find the sport, pick the sport, any sport you want to. He was the first African-American coach, and this was enabled by Pan Am. Would not have happened.
Such a great story.
And so it's very touching. The team at that time was practicing at Forest Hills High School. He slowly rolled onto the court. Somebody handed him a whistle. And it was the first time that he had a clipboard and a whistle as a coach. And he looked at them and they looked at him and they all realized, I think they all saw in each other that it was a kind of redemption. Okay, this guy was a former Harlem Globetrotter, former Division I athlete, went to the NIT, National Invitational Tournament, twice. And the man who stood up for sports across America, he's going to be our coach. And that's what happened. Now, as you know, Junius, and I'll go into some of the things that he accomplished, but I think he coached basketball all the way up to the point where he was an Olympic coach.
Wow.
And so he coached the U.S. Olympic team both in 1960 and 1964, and he won gold medals. And so this is very interesting. But before that, as the coach of the Pan Am Jets, and this is something that's kind of interesting to me, and I think to other people as well, by courtesy of Pan Am, Junius and the Pan Am Jets traveled the world, introducing not only the airline to the world, people that didn't know more about it, but the sport of wheelchair basketball. And I'll give you two quick examples. In 1957, he went on a goodwill tour. The team went on a goodwill tour to Brazil. And 2,000 people showed up at the airport to see the team. As he got off the plane, this little girl in leg braces came up to him and handed him some flowers. And he didn't have a lot of arm strength. Junius could not play, interestingly enough, he could not play wheelchair basketball. He could coach it. And so with all of his strength, he helped this little girl up into his lap with the flowers. And it was so touching that he made the front page of every newspaper in the country. And they called him Kellogg. I can't speak in Portuguese. But,
neither can I.
No, but Kellogg or Collagio, I don't know how they would say it. But everywhere he went, people screamed for him. He was a champion. This African-American man who grew up so dirt poor, the oldest of 11 in Portsmouth, Virginia, presented himself to the people of Brazil. One game they played in Rio, apparently, and the crowd screamed for him to go out on the court and shoot a basket.
Wow.
And he tried to say, I don't have the strength. I can't do it. And I don't know, you call it divine intervention or anything else. He goes out on the court, throws the ball up, and makes a basket. And the crowd goes wild. It was the last time that he ever scored a basket in the game. Then I'll give you one more story.
I just love this. This is such an incredible and inspiring story.
Oh, no, it is. I mean, he went toward the end of his stay with Pan Am. Now, the team disbanded in 1964, but in 1963, he went on a trip to Israel with the airline. The airline did not go to Israel at that time. They I think they used LL or another airline. And he played basketball. The Pan Am Jets played basketball in front of something like 150,000 people. Wow. with the team. And he met with the prime minister's wife. He met with educators. I know that he and John Woodbridge made a movie together, a 12-minute movie about that trip. I think it's been lost to time, as so many old movies get that way. And yet he was just loved. So here's the PS part of that story. A year or two later, both Brazil and Israel entered teams in the Paralympics. Both teams did extremely well. That would not have happened, I don't think, had not Pan Am introduced the sport to these countries to such an extent that they did. So we get to the point now where Junius, in 1959, kind of in between these two events, finally took the Pan Am Jets to the national championships, and they won.
Wow.
And they had won once before early on, but the competition each year got more and more intense. Now, I just want to say a couple things, and then we can talk about the Olympics, if you would like.
Sure.
Just very quickly in all this is a feel-good story, and I feel good telling it. But to not recognize that there was some inherent racism of the day would be to do Junius and a lot of other folks an injustice. Junius did encounter, believe it or not, racism on the Pan Am Jets. I don't know why we should think that all of the attitudes would be erased. Sometimes people get more bitter after accidents. Sometimes they get more loving. But Saul Welger, his friend, stood up for him the same way that Bob Otten stood up for Junius when he was at Manhattan College. So good people come from everywhere. And then one other incident I'll just tell you about. There was a very famous, adaptive sports games near London. These games, the Stoke Mandeville games, that occurred, and they accused the Jets of being too aggressive and acting like, quote, Harlem Globetrotters. It was not such a thinly veiled aggression against the fact that Junius wanted the Pan Am Jets to succeed. So now we come to the Olympics and his role in the Olympics. As I mentioned, he took the Pan Am Jets to Tokyo, and he took the Pan Am Jets, I believe, to Rome. And both times, the team, which was not completely composed of the Pan Am Jets, but many players, including his friend Saul Welger, were on the Olympic team. And both times, Junius coached them to Olympic gold.
Wow.
And it's an amazing, the whole story, it's an amazing story. And it's a story of courage, and it's a story of faith, and it's a story of overcoming obstacles. And believe it or not, this is just part of the beginning of Junius's amazing story. He would go on to other great things with his life.
You had mentioned earlier that Pan Am gave jobs to the players. Did they give a job to Junius?
Yes, I'm sorry. He joined the accounting department. He would have wanted to go into the public relations because he was so good at it. But he apparently kept the books not only for the team, because that was essential to do, but for a hotel chain that the airline was involved in. Mm-hmm. I think, to pick up a loose piece, Mr. McGuire offered Junius the job in November of 1956. And he said, Junius, when you get stronger, when you get out of the wards, we'll give you a job. And I think that probably happened later in 1957.
1957, an African-American accountant. That That is very progressive for that era.
They were Pan Am is, from everything I've read, a very progressive airline. Was everything perfect? No, of course not. But they were much further along than so many other organizations. And they breathed life into Junius Kellogg. Now, it would be naive to say that Junius didn't have a great publicity value for them. There was the publicist at Pan Am who, almost from the start of Junius's employ, wanted to write a book on Junius's life. Well, he was still a young guy at the time, but the book never got off the ground. But nevertheless, there was that push. And also, Junius, during that period of time that he was with the Pan Am Jets, developed not a deep friendship, but a nice friendship with a guy named Roy Campanella. And Roy Campanella, the famous catcher for the Brooklyn and then LA Dodgers, was involved in a motor vehicle accident and was paralyzed. It appears as though some of the letters written to the papers about can't be hanging there and do well, they were kind of placed, but they did develop a relationship. And going around again, a circle within a full circle, is that Junius and Roy Campanella, while he was still with Pan Am Jets, went to see several professional basketball players play for the Harlem Globetrotters, who would go on to be professionals, such as Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt Chamberlain started with the Harlem Globetrotters. But that's kind of outside the area here, but there was a great influence that Pan Am had, certainly not only on the life of Junius Kellogg, but in a bigger picture on the entire history of wheelchair, or what are now known as adaptive sports.
Fascinating. And he was also good friends with Jackie Robinson, correct?
He was good friends with Jackie Robinson. And if I'm not mistaken, Jackie Robinson once interviewed him.
You're right. And we have that interview from 1960 that we can play for you and our listeners, and then we can talk about it.
Oh, I'd love to.
Today, my guest is a most courageous young athlete, Junius Kellogg of collegiate and professional basketball fame. We'll meet Junius and hear the story of this lion-hearted gentleman right after we hear this important message.
Junius, I just want to say right now that it's good to see you. You look wonderful, and, well, tell me about the world champion Pan American wheelchair basketball team that you coach.
Well, see, Jackie, this team is comprised of about 15 fellows who were paralyzed when they were kids, say 3 and 4, and they spent between 9 and 16 years in the hospital, each of these fellows. Now, most of them are in fact, all of them out of the hospital. 3/4 of them are married and have families, and these are the fellows who comprise my wheelchair basketball team. Pan American World Airways has done a tremendous job in hiring the handicapped also. And they found out that these fellows could compete in athletics, and they sponsored us, and we are deeply grateful to them. Prior to my injury, I never knew this thing existed, as I know quite a few people in the country don't. And even if I had thought of it, you probably thought of a bunch of fellows who were handicapped who were just having some sport for themselves. But this is the most competitive thing I've ever seen. These fellows push from a dead start in these chairs for 60 yards in about 11 seconds.
In 11 seconds?
In 11 seconds. We have the National Wheelchair Games out at Boulevard Park every year. And the fella who won it this year wanted, a fraction more, 11.5. But you would have to see this to really get the true picture of it. And another fascinating thing about this group of mine, about 13 fellows, they play all sports. See, we're making preparations now for the Paralympics in London. And last year there were 38 nations competing against all chairs. And it was set up just like a regular Olympic village. And the sports, in the field, they throw the discus, the javelin, the shot put, and they have racing, basketball, snooker, swimming, ping pong, fencing, with foil and saber from the chair.
Is this where that you won your championship? Well, you won.
We won the world championship in London 2 years running. It's held every year.
Junius, this is a story I think that certainly should be told. You have a tremendous courage. I wish that the people would really know the great job that you've done.
Thank you very much, Jack, and it was a pleasure being here.
Well, that just about does it for now, fans. See you soon.
My thoughts on the interview with Jackie Robinson. First of all, it was a very gracious thing for Jackie to do. Also understand that Junius was interviewed by many people, including Dick Van Dyke and Mike Wallace. But in terms of this with Jackie Robinson, I think part of it was him being proud of Junius and Junius being proud to be with Jackie. There was also some publicity value to it. And Junius got in his talking points. And there's nothing wrong with that. The airline did a great deal for Junius, and Junius in turn wanted to do a great deal for the airline. That's my first impression. Whether or not they were fast friends, I don't know. Jackie Robinson, like Roy Campanella, their stars had risen, and they were ahead of Junius in terms of a broad base of popularity and on the professional level. Nevertheless, the important thing here is that Junius really stood at the crossroads of history, and his friends cut across all sports, politics, entertainment. One of the funny stories from Junius was back in the day when the scandal occurred. Hollywood rushed out and made a movie about the scandal, except the scandal featured only white actors, and Junius noted that, and he said, "It's interesting. I'm played by a white actor," but he knew Jackie. He, as everybody else, loved Jackie Robinson, and I'm sure that from time to time they kept in touch.
So, what happened to Junius after Pan Am?
It's very exciting and to me, very interesting. The Pan Am Jets disbanded in 1964. He still did a little bit of coaching after that, but for other teams. One of the magic moments in Junius's life is that he got invited to hear Dr. Martin Luther King speak down in Washington, D.C. on the Mall in August of 1964. And that had a profound effect on Junius's life. Junius maintained a very serious kind of public persona for a very long time. Certainly he couldn't rock any boats or anything like that, but Junius was a very serious about racial injustice in this country, and wanted more for African Americans than was being given to them. He wanted African Americans to come to the forefront. There was even kind of a controversial quote that Junius once gave about wheelchair basketball. And he said, and these are his words, "If more brothers would join the sport, we would dominate in that sport like in many others." And so he became very involved in community activism. He would eventually join the New York City Development Agency, which was an agency that worked with the poor of New York City to give them block grants. He first started with what's called the Harlem Youth Project, which came out of a program that Lyndon Johnson started back in the day. Unfortunately, the program was so ill-conceived that faded away. And Junius is part of that after he got that job was to kind of close down several sections of that job. But Junius would go on to city government, and over the years, in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the shoulders down, this man would become deputy director of this multi-million-dollar New York City agency.
Wow.
He would go on to, he did coach, he continued to coach. He coached high school kids, He coached able-bodied athletes. He never lost his love of the game. And through it all, the other side of the story, which is why my book is titled Junie and Me, he maintained this relationship with Bob Otten. And Bob Otten maintained until the day that he passed away in 2019 that it was Junius who saved his life, not the other way around. And Bob loved Junius dearly, but the story is one of such love and compassion. Most of it, or a great deal of it, could not have happened without the chance meeting of Junius Kellogg from Portsmouth, Virginia, making his way back to the Bronx, VA, to meet with these men who would introduce him to Pan Am Airways.
Interesting. Did he marry? Did he have a family, Junius?
Junius married briefly. He was married for about 10 years. Her name was Clementine Rigsby. It was difficult in those days, especially for a person in a wheelchair to form a real enduring long-term relationship. It's not that it never happened. She wanted other things for herself. I was able to interview her brother, and she was a very strong-willed woman who in the beginning said, I don't care what anybody thinks. I love this man, and we're going to get married. But a lot of times things are easier to say than to carry out. And also understand that when they met, I mean, the Americans with Disabilities Act was not even enacted at that time. And so a person in a wheelchair had to be carried up and down steps, had to be tended to. Junius was 6'10" and probably weighed 270 pounds by that time. Mm-hmm. It was very difficult, but he was married briefly. And it was another love story. She met him at the Bronx VA. She was a social worker.
Interesting. When did Julius pass away?
He passed away in September of 1998. And Bob Otten was at his bedside along with other key people in his life. And he became very sick. He developed an aneurysm. Junius died at 71 years of age, which, considering the catastrophic injury that he had, mm-hmm. It's a testament to genetics, but also the fact that he was a very good athlete and mm-hmm. and tried to push himself. But he died of, they actually treated the aortic aneurysm, and he recovered from that and some other minor surgeries, but he developed an infection in his heart, and they couldn't control it. So it was the very end of the story, sadly, is that they approached Bob Otten to help. This is the, at that time, now it's called the United Spinal, but then it was called the Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association. They put Junius's name up for the Hall of Fame, the real Basketball Hall of Fame. You could go in as an athlete. You can also go in as a contributing member. Mm-hmm. He missed making the Hall of Fame by one vote. Again, Bob Otten felt, this isn't Junius talking because he had passed away by then, that he embarrassed the NBA. Junius embarrassed the NBA because they knew that there were some professional basketball players in the very early days who were, quote, tainted. They had taken money. They might have influenced games. And Junius embarrassed them. And one sports writer from New York, he said that Junius not getting into the Hall of Fame was a tragedy of great proportion, because they knew that he deserved to be there, and he never was. Mm-hmm. And this is why I've tried to uncover his story a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And this is why we're doing what we're doing with this program.
It's exciting. It's very exciting.
Tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, the book is called Junie and Me. It's primarily written in Bob Otten's first-person voice. Bob and I met, we met, I think around 2013. We talked nearly every day. I interviewed him. I went up to Connecticut to interview him a few times. And it's about their friendship, about the friendship between Bob Otten and Junius Kellogg. And along the way, I had the chance to interview many other people associated with Junius's life. But as the book unfolded, I found that the story of Bob's love for Junius was so strong that to not focus on that would have been a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And he deeply loved Junius. And it was a great story of love and courage. And we haven't even gotten into the fact of Bob's side of the story, where when on the court, Junius basically couldn't really defend himself, especially when they played schools in the South or Midwest. And Bob, who was a pretty big, tough guy himself, think nothing of going out on the court after a play and just leveling anybody. And interestingly enough, it was Junius who yelled at Bob and told him to lose his temper and to not let them get to you that way, to get even. And Junius's life is a study in a human being getting even, because his life was so much bigger than his disability. And it's a very good lesson for all of us, in my opinion.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I cannot stress how moved I am by this story. It's so inspirational, and I hope our listeners feel the same way that I do. And I can't wait to find more material and read your book because it's so inspiring.
Well, and I in turn deeply thank you for your time and for giving me this opportunity, and certainly to congratulate you for the wonderful work that you're doing.
Well, thank you again.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye, Tom.
Pan Am was a pioneer in air travel and still stands as one of the most iconic and innovative airlines in aviation history. That legacy lives on at the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York, where you can explore the rich history of the aircrafts and individuals at the heart of the company known as the world's most experienced airline. For more information about the Pan Am Museum, check out our website at www.thepanammuseum.org. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. As was once a tagline in one of our commercials, we would greatly appreciate your support to help the Pan Am Museum continue making the going great. You can also support the museum by shopping on our online store for all things Pan Am: accessories, apparel, jewelry, books, models, and posters. We want to hear from you. If you have a question for us or want to share your story, our email address is podcast@thepanammuseum.org. As flight crews once said to passengers departing for their destinations around the world, thank you for flying, Pan Am.